Teddy pulled up and parked in front of the neighborhood store. The white merchant inside cashed all the checks for the women in the neighborhood. He had been dealing with the black people in the neighborhood for the past 30 years. When the city had rioted and people were burning out the white businessmen in the slums, the black women of his neighborhood had surrounded the store and wouldn't allow the men to loot. Teddy and his crowd of friends had been there, wanting to take off all the meat, but his mother and sister were in the front of the crowd of women. They stayed up in shifts, protecting the store. The wineheads, who wanted the cheap wine free, and the dope fiends, who wanted whatever they could get to sell, called the women honky lovers and whatever else they could think of. But it hadn't done any good. The next day when the owner came, expecting to see his store burned down or looted out, he cried when he found the women sitting out front joking. The women had displayed more sense than most of the men. They knew he was the only one they could turn to when their check money ran out. He carried them until the end of the month, and longer when some of them had trouble out of their men over their checks. It was not surprising for some of them to have to owe as much as $60 or $70 out of their checks at the end of the month. Bessie went in and cashed her check. When she came out, she gave Teddy $5. She'd been mad at him before, but she knew she couldn't help herself. She had grown up in the neighborhood just as he had. She had seen junkies all her life. Her brother was sick, and she knew it. When she gave him the money, she also knew he would go to the nearest dope house before taking her to the shopping center. Teddy's hand shook as he reached for the money. "Thanks, baby," he said with genuine emotion in his voice. He drove away from the curb without bothering to look. A beer truck almost hit him. "God damn it, why don't you look where you're going?" he yelled out the window at the rear of the truck. When he parked in front of Porky's house, he prayed that Porky wouldn't be out of stuff. He met two addicts coming down the stairs as he ran up. "Is Porky all right?" he asked, breathlessly. "Yeah, man, he got some stuff," one of the addicts answered. Bessie waited impatiently in the car. After half an hour, she thought about blowing the horn, but she knew that it would be wrong. It would probably get Teddy in trouble with the dope man if she blew the horn in front of his house. When she had just about made up her mind to blow the horn anyway, she saw him coming down the steps. He came over to the car, grinning. The drug had made another man out of him. He was almost like his old self, friendly and easy to joke with. He slid in under the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, sis, if I stayed too long, but I had to wait until he had cut up some stuff." She sighed. It wouldn't do any good to complain. He had given his excuse, and he probably thought that anyone would be able to understand why they had to wait almost an hour. The shopping center was crowded when they pulled into the parking lot. Teddy found a spot to park, not too far away, and they all climbed out. Bessie led the way into the store. Just like most women, once she entered the store, she lost all conception of time. Her eyes brightened, and she became obsessed with shopping. After an hour, she was still walking from counter to counter. After the second trip around the store, Teddy began to grow restless. "I thought you was gonna buy the kid some shoes, Bessie," he asked. "We've been around this dress counter for the last 5 hours," he complained, exaggerating the time. She glanced over her shoulder at him, while she and another woman both tugged at the same dress. "In a moment, honey," she said, as she got a tighter grip on the dress. Teddy snorted, eyeing the dress rack coldly. They were too cheap to steal, unless he could get away with the whole rack. He watched the other woman's purse and wondered idly if he could dip on her before she noticed him. He disregarded the idea. Ever since entering the store, he'd been looking for something to steal. But whenever he got the opportunity, the merchandise was always too cheap to bother with. He promised himself that, before he left, he'd take something to get another blow off of. As soon as the woman turned loose her end of the dress, Bessie lost interest in it and turned away from the dress counter. It occurred to Teddy that women enjoyed shopping more for the sake of snatching something out of each other's hands than for really shopping. The PA system announced a sale on children's clothes. The mention of sale immediately caught the women's attention, and before the speaker had finished, there was a small stampede toward the children's department. Teddy watched his sister, amused. She was like a racehorse coming out of a stall. With a firm grip on each of her son's arms, she was off and running in the wake of many of the faster women shoppers. When they reached the sale counter, it was too crowded, so they walked over to the children's shoes. After new tennis shoes were put on the boys' feet, they didn't want to take them off. They started to cry when Bessie ordered them to take the shoes off. To prevent the children from crying, she let the boys keep their new shoes on. The little girl decided she wanted to wear hers too. So again, she relented. She gave Teddy the old shoes to carry. They started for the checkout counter, but Bessie spotted an opening where the sale was going on and made a beeline for it. "Give me the money for the shoes, Bessie," Teddy said quickly. "I'll take the kids up front, so we won't still be at the end of the line when you get there." Without giving it any thought, she removed a $10 bill from her purse and gave it to him. "I'll catch up with you shortly, Teddy. I just want to get a few new outfits so the kids will have something to wear when school starts back." Teddy took the money. As he stood in the crowd of women, he dropped the boys' shoes on the floor, out of sight. He kicked them towards the front of the crowd of women. He pushed the kids up the aisle in front of him. When he got to the front counter, he stood on the side, not bothering to get in the line. He glanced around him casually. The old pair of girls' shoes were stuck down inside his shirt. With his jacket on, you couldn't even see it bulge. Without any apparent hurry, he started the children toward the nearest door. As soon as they reached the sidewalk, two white men stepped up beside him and grabbed his arms. Without any hurry, they ushered him and the children back in the store and led them to an office in the rear of the building. It had been done so neatly that very few people realized what was going on. A little later, when Bessie paid for her articles, another woman approached her as she left the checkout counter. They spoke briefly for a few moments. Then the woman led her toward the office in the back of the store. When Bessie entered the office, she saw her children standing around crying, while her brother leaned up against the wall as though nothing had happened. More ashamed than frightened, Bessie removed all of her sales slips and showed that she had paid for all of her purchases. "It must have been a misunderstanding," she pleaded. "Teddy must have thought that I was going to pay for the shoes." The store detectives watched her closely. The crying of the children was beginning to get on their nerves. "We don't have the slightest doubt in our minds about whether or not your brother was planning on stealing those shoes, miss. If he had intended on paying for them, why would he have bothered to conceal the old ones that the kids took off?" Bessie shrugged her shoulders. She felt like crying herself. Nothing like this had ever happened to her before. She was angry at Teddy, but she didn't want to see him go to jail. "Couldn't you let him go this time?" she pleaded. "I'm sure if you do, he'll never come back in your store again." She stared from one detective to the other, anxiously. The woman who had shown her the way to the office spoke up. "Could you pay for the shoes?" she asked. Bessie fumbled awkwardly with her purse. She snatched it open. "Here," she said, and held out a $20 bill. "This should be more than enough." The detectives glanced at each other. The older one spoke up sharply. "We'll give him a break this time, but if we ever see his face in here again," he said as he stared at Teddy, "we'll lock his ass up so fast he won't know what happened." Teddy sneered as Bessie followed him and the children out of the store. She believed that everyone in the store was watching them, and she blushed furiously. Before they had reached the car, her shame had turned to anger. "Give me my money!" she demanded sharply. Her voice was full of scorn and anger. Teddy felt the $10 bill in his pocket. "I lost it," he stated coldly, and continued on towards the car. 5. It was a hot, muggy day, and the sun was shining brightly through the windows. Terry put the vacuum cleaner in the closet and went back into the front room. Their home was a lovely house that ran in the $20,000 bracket. Her father kept the lawn beautiful, and her mother kept the inside of the house immaculate. The living room and dining room floors were covered with light brown, wall-to-wall carpeting and boasted matching dark bronze French provincial furniture and golden drapes. The dining room table had a matching china cabinet. All gave the appearance of utter good taste. "Terry?" her mother called from the kitchen. "Have you finished yet?" "Yes, Mom," Terry replied as she flopped down on the couch. "You want me to make some chicken sandwiches for your lunch today?" "Don't worry, Mom. I'll probably buy something to eat at work. Lately I haven't been having any type of appetite." "You can say that again," her mother replied. Again and again her mind returned to the dope upstairs. She'd got out of bed and come downstairs to get away from the temptation, but the yearn for the drug was getting too big. All the while she'd been cleaning up, her mind kept returning to the heroin. It was becoming a fixation she couldn't quite get away from. Never before in her short life had she ever had such a desire. It was a nagging, constant thought, something she couldn't just dismiss. She sniffed and wondered if she was coming down with a cold. For the past half an hour, she'd been sniffling. She promised herself that she would absolutely refuse to snort any dope for the next week. Yet before the promise had left her mind, she found herself climbing the stairs towards her bedroom. Her mother's voice drifted up the stairs.